My husband stared at me with cold, dead shark eyes and said, "I want the house, the cars, the business, everything." He didn't shed a tear. He didn't offer an apology. He was demanding it with the entitlement of a man ordering a steak, reading from a script his expensive lawyer had clearly rehearsed with him. It felt like 16 years of marriage, 2 beautiful children, and every brick we had laid together amounted to nothing more than a liquidation sale. My lawyer, Sarah Jenkins, stiffened in her chair and squeezed my hand under the mahogany conference table. She had been a shark in family law in Atlanta for nearly 3 decades. She had seen women completely destroyed in divorce court. She had watched greedy husbands hide assets and manipulate the custody system like it was a game. But when I leaned over and whispered exactly what I was planning to do, her professional mask slipped, and her eyes went wide with genuine concern. "Before we dive into this chaos, I have to ask you something. Where are you listening from right now? Drop your city or state in the comments below. I absolutely love seeing how far our family of survivors reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button right now. Your support is the fuel that keeps this community burning bright. Thank you for being here, Elena. We can fight this, Elena," Sarah hissed, her voice low but urgent. "We should fight this. He is not entitled to half of what he's demanding. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. We have leverage. We have options." I looked at her, seeing the fire in her eyes, then I slowly shifted my gaze to Marcus. He was sitting across from me, flanked by his attorney, that familiar, smug smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The same face I used to trace with my fingertips on lazy Sunday mornings. The same man I held through the night when his father passed away. The same person who stood before God and our families at the chapel and promised to cherish me through every storm. "Give it to him," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but steady as a rock. Sarah's pen froze midair. "Excuse me? What did you just say?" "You heard me, Sarah. The house, the cars, the business. Give him every single thing he's asking for." Marcus's expression flickered. Just for a microsecond. He wasn't expecting total surrender. His lawyer, a slick guy named Brad with teeth too white to be real and a suit that cost more than my first car, leaned over and whispered something rapidly into Marcus's ear. Marcus nodded slowly, a predatory glint entering his eyes, looking like a man who had just won the Powerball. He thought I had finally broken. He thought I was waving a white flag because I was too weak to fight. Everyone in that room thought I was defeated. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't know that I wasn't handing him a victory. I was handing him a loaded grenade, and I had already pulled the pin. My phone rang that night, the screen glowing with a contact photo that usually brought me peace but now brought a spike of dread. It was Nana Rose. Her voice wasn't just thick with worry. It was laced with a sharp, simmering anger I hadn't heard since I was a teenager. Nana Rose was a woman of few words, a retired head nurse who had seen everything life could throw at a person, but when she raised her voice, the whole family snapped to attention. She had raised 5 children single-handedly after my grandfather passed, working double shifts to ensure we had a future, and she never asked for a dime from a soul. She was the moral compass of our family. Hearing the sheer disappointment in her tone cut me deeper than any of Marcus's cheap betrayal. "Elena Marie Vance, have you lost your absolute mind? What in God's name are you doing?" Her voice cracked, not from age, but from disbelief. "Your grandfather built that business from dirt. He started with a single smoker and a tent at the county fair, worked himself to the bone making every sacrifice imaginable so your mama and you could have something real, something to call your own, and now you're just handing it over to a man who doesn't deserve a single second of your loyalty. Nana, please, I need you to trust me on this." "Trust you? Baby, you are not thinking straight. That man has broken your heart into pieces, and a broken heart makes poor, desperate decisions. Let me call your Uncle Ray. Let me get the family together. We won't let him take it. I am not broken, Nana. Not anymore. And I promise you, I know exactly what I am doing." The line went quiet. I could hear the static and her breathing on the other end, measured and deliberate, like she was assessing a patient's vitals. When she finally spoke again, her voice had softened, losing the edge but keeping the weight. "Your grandfather used to say that silence is a weapon, but only when wielded by the right hands. I pray you know what you're holding, baby girl." "I do, Nana. I promise I do." My best friend, Chloe, showed up at my apartment the next morning before the sun was even fully up. She brought 2 large lattes, a box of those glazed croissants we used to obsess over, and absolute fire in her eyes. Chloe and I had been tight since our days at Spelman College. Both of us, young, hungry, and ambitious. She had gone into high-stakes commercial real estate, climbed her way to senior partner, and she had zero tolerance for disrespect. She had warned me about Marcus years ago, subtle, quiet warnings I'd brushed off because love had made me blind. She didn't waste a second on pleasantries. She didn't even take off her coat. Tell me you didn't actually agree to give him everything, Elena. Tell me Sarah misunderstood your instructions. I gave him everything he asked for, Chloe. Chloe slammed her coffee down on the quartz counter hard enough to splash foam onto the floor. Have you lost your entire mind? That restaurant your family built? The house you renovated with your own money? The investments you made while he was out there playing games? You're just going to let him walk away with all of it? Why? Are you that afraid of him? No. I pulled out a heavy, black expandable folder from my desk drawer. It was thick with documents, bank statements, flagged invoices, credit card bills, phone logs, and detailed private investigator reports. I slid it across the kitchen island. The sound of it hitting the counter was heavy, solid. I'm doing it because he doesn't know what he's really taking. Chloe stared at the folder, then at me. She opened it. Her eyes scanned the first page, confusion furrowing her brow. Then she moved faster, flipping through the second and third pages. By the time she reached the summary from the forensic analysis, her hand flew up to cover her mouth, and her eyes were glistening with a mix of rage and dark vindication. Is this evidence of what I think it is? Every bit of it. And he has no idea I know. She closed the folder carefully, treating it like it contained something radioactive. She looked up at me, and for the first time since this nightmare began, a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. Girl, she whispered, shaking her head. You might be the coldest woman I've ever met. And I mean that with the utmost respect. See, everyone thought I was defeated. They looked at me and saw a woman who had given up, a wife who had walked into those divorce proceedings and just handed over her life without so much as a whimper. My mama called me crying the night before. My cousins sent worried texts full of prayer hands emojis. And people at our church whispered prayers for my broken spirit behind their hymnals. But they didn't know what I knew. They didn't see what I had discovered buried deep in 3 years of financial records, secret email accounts, and digital breadcrumbs he thought he'd erased forever. They didn't understand that sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight louder. It's to step back, stay terrifyingly quiet, and let your enemy walk straight into the trap they built with their own lies. So, when I walked into that courtroom for the final hearing where truth would finally speak louder than his charm, I wasn't nervous. I wasn't defeated. I wasn't crying into my pillow, wondering how my life had fallen apart. I was patient, deliberate, and absolutely certain of what was about to unfold. Marcus sat at his table looking like he had already spent the settlement money in his mind. He had been showing up to Sunday service at a different church, one where nobody knew our history. He sat in the back row with his new girlfriend on his arm, a young woman named Tiffany, a fitness instructor who looked bored and didn't know she was dating a liar and a thief. He had already made plans to renovate the restaurant, rebrand it under his name, and cut out every piece of my grandfather's legacy. He had already counted money he thought was his. He glanced at me when I walked in, and I saw it. That cold, victorious look, like he had won some prize he'd been chasing for years. I signed every document they placed in front of me. I agreed to every term Sarah had negotiated under my strict instruction. My family sat in the back row looking like they were attending a funeral. Nana Rose dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. My Uncle Ray sat stone-faced, arms crossed, radiating silent fury. And then, the courtroom doors opened. 2 people in dark suits walked in. Federal agents with credentials clipped to their belts. They didn't look at me. They approached Brad, Marcus's lawyer, and handed him a document. I watched the color drain from Brad's face. I watched him lean over and whisper something into Marcus's ear, 4 words that I couldn't hear but could read in the way Marcus's entire body went rigid. His smug expression vanished instantly. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned pale. And then he did something I'll never forget. He turned and looked at me, really looked at me. And I saw the exact moment he understood. He screamed my name. Not a yell, a full-throated scream that echoed through the courtroom like a wounded animal. Elena. The bailiff rushed over. The judge banged her gavel 3 times, the sound cracking through the air like gunshots, but I just sat there, hands folded calmly in my lap, and watched the man who stole my trust, my money, and my peace finally receive exactly what he'd earned. Marcus James Vance, the lead agent announced, her voice cutting through the chaos. You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. You set me up. Marcus roared, lunging toward me before the bailiff grabbed him. You knew. You planned this whole thing. You knew the business was toxic. I stood slowly, smoothed my dress, looked him straight in the eyes, and spoke clearly so everyone could hear. I knew exactly what you did, Marcus. Every stolen dollar, every betrayal. I gave you the business because you wanted it so badly, because your greed made you blind. You thought you were taking my future, but all you took was your own prison sentence. My name is Elena Vance, and this is the story of how I lost everything and clawed my way back inch by bloody inch. But to understand the ending, let me take you back to the beginning, to where everything started to make sense, even though it felt like the world was ending. I grew up in Southwest Atlanta, in a neighborhood where everyone knew your name, your grandmother's maiden name, and exactly what kind of casserole you brought to the church potluck. My grandfather, Silas Vance, started Vance's Smokehouse in 1990 with a single, rusted food truck parked outside the Georgia Tech campus. He wasn't a classically trained chef from Paris. He was a man who loved feeding people, who believed that good food and good conversation could bridge any divide and build a real community. He served soul food with a modern rhythm. His bourbon-glazed ribs and smoked brisket-collared greens became legendary in the city. His sweet potato cheesecake sold out every single day by noon, and his sweet tea was so perfect, folks swore he had made a deal with the heavens to get the sugar ratio right. By the time I was 10 years old, that food truck had turned into a small, bustling restaurant in Cascade Heights. By the time I was 16, Vance's Southern Table was the place where families celebrated graduations, where nervous couples had first dates, and where the neighborhood gathered after funerals to remember and to heal. It was the heartbeat of our block. My grandfather died of a sudden heart attack when I was 25, right after I'd graduated from Spelman with a degree in business management. He left the restaurant to my mother, but Mama had her hands full teaching at Booker T. Washington High School, so she asked me to take over operations. I want you to carry this forward, Elena, she told me, handing me the heavy iron keys. Your granddaddy built this legacy for family. Don't let it become just another cold business. Keep it alive. I promised her I would. I worked 75-hour weeks, learning every position from dishwasher to line cook to payroll manager. I rebuilt the menu to honor Granddaddy's recipes while adding my own vision. I expanded catering services to corporate clients, started a jazz Sunday brunch that had lines wrapping around the block, and grew Vance's Southern Table into something my family could be fiercely proud of. I made the sacrifice of my 20s because I believed in what we were building. I wasn't just flipping tables. I was feeding spirits. I met Marcus exactly 3 years after I took over the restaurant. He walked in one rainy Tuesday afternoon, shaking off a wet umbrella but looking like he had just stepped out of a GQ magazine spread. He was dressed in sharp business casual, carrying a leather portfolio, with charm dripping from every word he spoke to my hostess. He was working in pharmaceutical sales, making decent money, always talking about high-yield investments, future plans, and building generational wealth. He had the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, a spotlight that warmed you from the inside out and made you forget to check the shadows. We dated for a whirlwind year. He proposed at the Atlanta Botanical Garden during the holiday light show, getting down on one knee under a canopy of twinkling LED lights in front of hundreds of cheering strangers. I said yes without a second of hesitation because I believed he was my partner. I believed he was the person I would build a life with. We got married at the historic Big Bethel AME Church, the same sanctuary where my parents had been baptized. It was a September afternoon, warm and golden, the kind of day that felt blessed from the moment you woke up. Nana Rose cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a vintage lace handkerchief she'd embroidered herself. Chloe stood beside me as maid of honor, stunning in emerald green, giving a toast that made everyone laugh about our college all-nighters and cry about a friendship that transcends time. Marcus looked at me during our first dance like I was the answer to every prayer he'd ever whispered. The live band played a soulful cover of Ribbon in the Sky, and we swayed together while our families watched, while camera flashes captured what I thought would be the beginning of forever. His hands were gentle on my waist. His voice was soft against my ear. I'm going to make you the happiest woman in Atlanta, Elena. I promise you that. I believed him. God help me. I believed every single one of his vows. I believed in the sanctity of our marriage. Our honeymoon was 2 weeks in Street Lucia. We stayed at a private villa overlooking the Pitons. We spent our days in the turquoise ocean and our nights talking about the future we'd build together. Marcus talked about expanding his career, moving up to regional director, maybe starting his own consulting firm one day. I talked about growing the legacy of the restaurant, adding new locations, creating jobs in the community, making my grandfather proud. We're going to build an empire together, baby, he said, his hand tightly gripping mine as we watched the sunset paint the Caribbean sky in shades of orange and purple. Our kids are going to grow up knowing that their parents created something meaningful. I held on to that vision for years. I held on to it even when reality started to look different than the dream. I held on to it because I didn't know that for him, empire meant something entirely different than it did for me. For me, it was about roots. For him, it was about the fruit he could pick without planting a seed. Our daughter Maya arrived 2 years later, born on a stormy Tuesday morning in March, weighing 7 pounds and looking at the world with Nana Rose's knowing eyes. The moment the nurse placed her in my arms, I understood what my mama meant when she said that becoming a mother rewrites your entire DNA. Marcus was right there in the delivery room, holding my hand through every contraction, tears streaming down his face when he first heard her cry. She's perfect, he whispered, his voice cracking. Elena, we made something perfect. Those early months with Maya were exhausting in the most beautiful way possible. I'd bring her to the restaurant in a carrier strapped to my chest, checking inventory one-handed, taking breaks to nurse her in the back office, introducing her to the staff who quickly became her extended family. My head chef, a tough-as-nails woman named Big Mama Pearl who had worked with my grandfather since the food truck days, would sing old gospel hymns while she prepped collard greens. And Maya would fall asleep to the sound of her voice mixed with the rhythmic chopping of knives and the hiss of the sauté pans. Marcus was attentive during that first year. He'd come home from work and take Maya so I could shower or sleep or just breathe for 20 minutes without someone needing me. He'd walk her around the living room at 2:00 the morning when she wouldn't settle, humming old R&B songs in a falsetto he'd never let anyone else hear. He'd look at me across the dinner table with such tenderness that I'd forget about the exhaustion, forget about the spit-up stains on my blouse and the sleepless nights. Then Leo came 3 years later, and everything shifted again. He was born fast and furious, arriving so quickly we barely made it to Northside Hospital. He had his father's dimples and a personality that announced itself from day one. Where Maya had been calm and observant, Leo was pure kinetic energy and endless questions. He wanted to touch everything, taste everything, understand how the world worked by taking it apart. I used to bring both kids to the restaurant on weekends. Maya helping fold napkins with the precision of a surgeon. Leo helping in the kitchen by stealing tastes of mac and cheese and giving his very serious opinions about the seasoning. The staff adored them both. Our regular customers watched them grow up, brought them birthday presents, asked about their school projects and soccer games. Those were the sweet years, exhausting, yes, but full of purpose and meaning. I was building something that would outlast me. Something my children could inherit if they chose to. Something that honored my family's sacrifice. I worked 70-hour weeks, but I loved every minute of it. I was creating legacy, building community, feeding people not just food, but love and connection. Marcus seemed proud of me during those years. He'd bring colleagues to the restaurant for lunch, show off the success I'd built, introduce me as my brilliant wife who runs this place. He'd tell stories about my grandfather, about building generational wealth. He'd put his arm around me and smile like we were an unbreakable team. But looking back now, with eyes that have been opened by betrayal, I can see the moments I missed, the slight edge of resentment in his jaw when someone praised my success instead of his. The way he'd quickly change the subject when conversations turned to my business accomplishments. The subtle comparisons he'd make between his corporate world and my little restaurant. I missed the cracks in the foundation because I was too busy admiring the house we built on top of it. Somewhere around year 12 of our marriage, Marcus started to change. It wasn't sudden, like a car crash you can pinpoint to a specific second. It was gradual, like watching a slow leak in a ceiling so subtle you question whether the stain is growing or if you're just imagining things, until suddenly the whole roof caves in. He stopped coming to the restaurant as often. At first, it was I'm swamped with quarter-end reports. Then it became, I'm just too exhausted for the noise, Elena. He used to love sitting at the corner booth during dinner service, watching me command the floor, tasting new barbecue sauces I'd developed, giving me that proud smile that made my 14-hour shifts feel light as a feather. But somewhere along the way, that stopped. And I was too busy, too focused on keeping the business profitable to recognize what was really happening. He started working later and later. 10 p.m. became midnight. Midnight became 2:00 the morning. When I'd ask about it, he'd get defensive, his voice taking on a sharp, condescending edge. You don't understand what it's like in corporate America, Elena. You run a family restaurant. It's different when you're climbing a ladder in a global pharmaceutical company. There are politics, expectations, quotas I have to meet. The words stung. Not because they were harsh, but because of what they implied, that what I did was somehow less important, less demanding, less worthy of respect. As if feeding hundreds of people every week, managing a staff of 20, honoring my grandfather's legacy, and maintaining the financial health of a pillar in our community was just a cute little hobby. I should have pushed back. I should have demanded he explain exactly what made his spreadsheets more valuable than my sweat equity. But I was raised to support my husband, to believe that a strong woman lifts her man up even when he's leaning on her too hard. So, I swallowed my hurt. I wrapped his dinner in foil, left it in the fridge, and told myself this was just a season we had to weather. His relationship with his phone changed, too. And that was perhaps the clearest sign I should have recognized. It became an extension of his body, constantly in his hand or his pocket. Screen always facing down. Password changed every few weeks. He'd take it with him to the bathroom, to the garage, to the backyard when he wanted fresh air for a work call. If I walked into a room while he was texting, he'd quickly switch screens, his face arranging itself into a mask of casual innocence that looked like anything but. When I asked about it once, trying to keep my voice light and curious rather than accusatory, he exploded. Why are you keeping tabs on me, Elena? Why can't I have some privacy? Do I interrogate you about every vendor you talk to at the restaurant? I was so shocked by his anger that I apologized. I apologized for noticing that my husband was hiding something. I apologized for having the audacity to wonder why the person I shared a bed with needed so many digital walls. Then came the physical distance. He started staying on his side of the king-sized bed, a careful 6 inches of cold sheet between us like an invisible force field. The goodnight kisses disappeared. The casual touches, his hand on my lower back as I cooked, his lips on my forehead before leaving for work, all of it evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. Our intimacy became mechanical when it happened at all, which was less and less frequently. He'd close his eyes, and I couldn't shake the feeling he was imagining someone else. Sometimes he'd say a name that wasn't mine in his sleep, a mumbled, incoherent sound, then wake up startled and defensive when I asked about it. It was a client, he'd say, wiping sweat from his forehead. We were working on a pitch. It doesn't mean anything, but it meant everything. Every small lie, every deflection, every moment of distance was a brick in a wall that was slowly separating us. And I was so busy trying to hold our family together, trying to be the perfect wife and mother and businesswoman, that I didn't see the wall until I was completely on the other side of it, alone. The changes in his appearance were subtle but significant. New cologne, something musky and expensive, nothing like the clean, citrus scent he'd worn for years. Better clothes, tailored Italian shirts and designer denim instead of his usual comfortable khakis. He started going to a high-end barber in Buckhead, paying $80 for a haircut when he used to go to Mr. Earl's shop in the neighborhood for $20. He joined a luxury gym and became obsessed with his physique, leaving at 5:00 the morning and returning 2 hours later, showered and energized in a way he never was after coming home to me. When I complimented the changes, trying to find something positive to say, something that might bridge the growing canyon between us, he barely acknowledged it. Just trying to take better care of myself, Elena. Is that a problem? Everything was framed as me being the problem. Me being too sensitive. Me being too suspicious. Me being too demanding. Me not understanding his world. The gaslighting was so subtle, so consistent, that I started to question my own sanity. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe marriage just evolved this way after a decade. Maybe I was expecting too much. But Chloe saw what I was trying desperately not to see. The first real crack that I couldn't ignore, couldn't rationalize away with excuses about stress or corporate ladders, happened on our 12th anniversary. I had been planning it for weeks, desperate to recreate some of the magic we had lost, trying to breathe life back into a connection that had been eroding steadily over the past 2 years. I had arranged everything with military precision. I called Nana Rose to watch Maya and Leo overnight so we wouldn't have to rush back. I made reservations 3 months in advance at the Riverbank Bistro, that stunning restaurant overlooking the Chattahoochee where we had celebrated our very first anniversary a decade earlier. I remembered sitting across from him that night, young and hopeful, believing we were invincible. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a midnight blue silk slip dress that hugged curves I hadn't shown off in years. Chloe had helped me pick it out at Phipps Plaza, insisting that I needed to remind Marcus exactly who he was coming home to. I had spent 2 hours at the salon getting my hair blown out and my makeup done professionally. For the first time in months, I felt beautiful. I felt like Elena again instead of just mom or the boss. I arrived at the riverbank at 7 p.m. Exactly, clutching the anniversary card I had written that morning. I had poured my heart into those words, trying to express hope, commitment, and the belief that our vows were strong enough to weather this drought. The hostess led me to a prime table by the floor-to-ceiling window. The river was reflecting the amber glow of the setting sun, and the soft hum of jazz created a backdrop that should have been romantic. It was perfect. Everything was set for a new beginning. Except Marcus didn't show up. I sat there checking my phone every 30 seconds, watching the battery percentage drop, watching other couples arrive and settle into their evenings. I watched them hold hands across the white tablecloths, saw them laugh at private jokes, noticed the way they leaned toward each other with the easy intimacy of people who still actually liked each other. A waiter came by 3 times to ask if I was ready to order, his expression shifting from professional courtesy to a pitying awkwardness that made my skin crawl. "I'm just waiting for my husband," I said each time, keeping my voice bright and confident, even as something inside my chest was crumbling into dust. "He's running a little late. Traffic, you know." 45 minutes passed. The sun set completely, and the river turned into a ribbon of darkness beneath the string lights. I ordered a glass of expensive Cabernet just to have something to do with my trembling hands, just to avoid the sympathetic stares from the elderly couple at the next table who had clearly figured out the narrative. My phone finally rang at 7:53 p.m. I grabbed it so fast I nearly knocked over the candle. Marcus's name lit up the screen, and a wave of pathetic relief flooded through me. He was just late, a flat tire, a dead battery. He'd be here soon, breathless and apologetic, and we could salvage this. "Elena, hey," he said. His voice had no apology in it. Just a clipped irritation, like I was interrupting something important. I completely forgot. Forgot? The word tasted like ash in my mouth. "I'm at a dinner with the regional VPs. It ran late. It's huge for my networking. Can we reschedule for Saturday?" The noise of the restaurant seemed to fade away. In the silence, I could hear the background noise on his end clearly. It wasn't a stiff corporate dinner. I heard distinct laughter. I heard the clinking of glasses. I heard a woman's high-pitched giggle and the thumping bass of upbeat music. He wasn't working late. He was at a party. He was having the time of his life while I sat alone on our anniversary, dressed up with nowhere to go, holding a card that suddenly felt like a cruel joke. "Marcus." My voice came out smaller than I intended, trembling with the effort to not scream. "It's our anniversary. 12 years. I know. Look, I'm sorry, okay? But you know how important my career is right now. Don't make this a thing. We'll do brunch this weekend. Okay." Silence stretched between us, filled with everything I wanted to say and couldn't. I wanted to scream that our marriage should be more important than any networking event. I wanted to tell him that I had spent weeks planning this, that I felt foolish and small. I wanted to ask when I had become so invisible to him that he couldn't even put a reminder in his calendar for the day we promised our lives to each other. But I didn't say any of that. I just said, "Okay," and hung up. I sat at that table for another 10 minutes, finishing my wine in big, unladylike gulps, trying to compose myself enough to walk out without breaking down. The waiter approached one more time, his young face full of genuine concern. "Ma'am, I don't mean to overstep, but if you need anything, just the check for the wine, please." I paid, tipped him way more than necessary, and walked out to the parking lot on legs that felt like jelly. The Atlanta night was thick and humid, but I felt cold all the way to my bones. I sat in my SUV in that dark parking lot and cried until my expensive makeup ran down my cheeks and my eyes swelled shut. I cried for the marriage I thought I had. I cried for the man who used to love me enough to never make me wait. I cried for the woman I had become, someone who accepted being forgotten, who apologized for having needs, who made herself smaller and smaller to fit into the shrinking space he left for me. That was the moment I started to understand that this wasn't just a rough patch. That was the moment the foundation cracked wide enough that I couldn't pretend I didn't see the abyss underneath anymore. Chloe cornered me at the restaurant 3 weeks after the anniversary disaster. It was a Tuesday night, typically our slow day, but I was buried in the back office going over food costs and payroll, trying to lose myself in the black and white certainty of numbers because my actual life felt like a gray blur. She walked in without knocking, closed the heavy oak door behind her, and sat down across from my cluttered desk with an expression I had learned to recognize over 20 years of friendship. She had something heavy to say, and she wasn't leaving until she unloaded it. "We need to talk, Elena. I'm kind of buried here, Chloe. End of month reconciliation and the vendor for the ribs is trying to hike prices, Elena." She said my name the way she used to when we were at Spelman, and I was about to text an ex-boyfriend I shouldn't. Put the calculator down. "Look at me." I looked up, and the raw concern in her eyes made my throat go tight instantly. "I saw Marcus last week." My hands stopped moving. "Okay?" He wasn't alone. The office suddenly felt too small, the air conditioning humming too loud, the walls closing in. I set my pen down carefully, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the paper, because if I moved too quickly, I felt like I might shatter into a million pieces. "What do you mean he wasn't alone?" Chloe leaned forward, her elbows on her knees, her voice gentle but firm as steel. "I mean, I saw him at the Capitol Grill last Thursday night. I was there with a commercial client celebrating a closing. And I saw your husband at a secluded corner booth with a woman. They weren't having a business dinner, Elena. They were close. Dangerously close. Maybe it was a colleague," I said, my voice sounding thin. "You know how he is with networking." Chloe shook her head slowly. "Girl, you know me. You know I wouldn't bring this betrayal to your doorstep unless I was 100% sure. This wasn't a meeting. This was a date." She was laughing at everything he said, touching his arm, leaning in so far she was practically in his lap. "And he was looking at her the way he used to look at you 10 years ago." My chest tightened, a physical band of pain wrapping around my ribs. "Did he see you?" That's the worst part. When I walked past to the restroom, I made direct eye contact with him. You know what he did? He looked right through me. Like he didn't know me. Like I hadn't been the maid of honor at his wedding. He pretended I was invisible because he knew exactly what I was witnessing. I wanted to argue. I wanted to defend him, to find some rational explanation. But I couldn't. Because deep down, beneath all my denial and hope and determination to keep my family intact, I had known. Maybe not the specifics, but I had felt the shift. Did you see who she was? Young. Early 22nd. Light skin. Expensive weave. Looking like an Instagram model. She had that look, Elena, like she thought she had won a prize. The description felt like a physical blow. I had been working myself to the bone, raising our children, taking care of Nana Rose, managing the business, and he had been out in public with someone younger, fresher, and less complicated. Chloe reached across the desk and took my cold hand. I love you, Elena. And I know you love him. But love isn't supposed to make you feel like a beggar in your own marriage. Love isn't supposed to leave you sitting alone on your anniversary. You need to remember who you were before him. A brilliant, strong queen who doesn't need a man who can't appreciate the crown. I need proof, I whispered. The words tasted like bile. Before I do anything drastic, I need to know for sure. No assumptions. I need evidence. Chloe nodded slowly. Then let's get you evidence. Whatever you need, I'm here. But promise me you won't let him make you feel crazy anymore. I promise. Even though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. Even though the shame was already settling into my bones like a winter chill. I hired a private investigator exactly 48 hours after my conversation with Chloe. His name was Detective Miller, a retired Atlanta police detective who had spent 2 decades working major fraud cases before opening his own firm specializing in infidelity and asset recovery. I found him through a hushed referral from Sarah Jenkins, whose name kept popping up on the top divorce attorneys lists I was secretly browsing at 3 a.m. His office was located in a nondescript brick building in Midtown, sandwiched between a dry cleaner and a dentist's office, the kind of place you could drive past 1,000 times and never notice. The waiting room was sterile, gray industrial carpet, generic abstract art, and a water cooler that hummed too loudly. Nothing about it suggested the life-altering explosions that happened behind those frosted glass doors. Detective Miller was in his late 50s, a man built like a linebacker who had gone to seed, with silver threading through his hair and eyes that were flat and unshakable. He wore a rumpled navy suit and moved with the careful deliberation of someone who knew that rushing led to mistakes. When he shook my hand, his grip was firm but surprisingly gentle. "Mrs. Vance, please have a seat. Before we begin, I need to be brutally honest with you about this process," Miller said, his voice a low rumble. "In my experience, when a spouse walks through that door, they usually already know the truth deep down. You aren't paying me for answers. You're paying me for confirmation. Are you prepared for what that confirmation might look like? Are you prepared for it to be worse than you imagined? I need evidence, detective, not suspicions, not gut feelings. I need cold, hard proof." He nodded slowly, uncapping a cheap ballpoint pen. "Then let's get to work. Here is the plan. I'll conduct physical surveillance to track his movements. I'll pull bank statements if you can provide authorized access to joint accounts. I'll scour phone records, cross-reference credit card bills, and dig into digital archives. Whatever leaves a trail, I will find it. This usually takes 2 to 3 weeks. Can you maintain normal behavior at home during that time?" "I've been pretending everything is fine for 2 years," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can do it for 3 more weeks." "Good. Because the element of surprise is the only leverage you have left." The next 21 days were a masterclass in psychological torture. I had to wake up next to Marcus every morning, make his espresso, kiss his cheek, and ask him about his day while fighting the urge to scream. I had to listen to his fabricated stories about late meetings and client dinners, nodding sympathetically while my stomach twisted into knots. I had to maintain the fiction of normalcy for Maya and Leo, who were too young to understand that the ground beneath their feet was about to split open. Detective Miller called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was at the restaurant, reviewing the upcoming holiday menu, when his name flashed on my phone. My stomach dropped to the floor. "Mrs. Vance, the report is ready. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" "How bad is it?" There was a heavy pause on the line. "I think it's best we discuss this in person." I arrived at his office at 9 a.m. sharp, having told my staff I had a dentist appointment. My hands were trembling as I walked into the conference room. This time, the mahogany desk was covered with manila folders, each one labeled and organized with terrifying precision. "I'm going to be direct," Miller said, opening the first folder. "Your husband has been having an affair for approximately 18 months. Her name is Tiffany Davis, 24 years old." He slid photographs across the table. Marcus and Tiffany entering the W Hotel in Buckhead. Timestamps showing 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus and Tiffany shopping at Lenox Square, holding hands. Marcus kissing her in a parking garage with a passion I hadn't seen in a decade. "But Mrs. Vance," Miller said, opening a second, thicker folder, "the affair is actually the least of your problems. I brought in a forensic accountant to review the business records you gave me access to. We found something else. Your husband has been setting up shell companies in his name. He has been funneling money out of your restaurant for over a year." The room didn't just spin, it tilted on its axis. "What do you mean funneling money?" I asked, my voice barely audible over the humming of the air conditioner. "He has been using his administrative access to the business accounts," Detective Miller explained, his tone clinical but grim. "Access you granted him when you made him an authorized signatory 3 years ago for emergencies. He used that trust to set up a pipeline directly into offshore accounts. It started small, a few $100s here, 1,000 there, buried under line items that looked like legitimate vendor payments for produce or equipment maintenance. But it escalated significantly. In the past 6 months alone, he has transferred over $340,000. I couldn't breathe. My hands gripped the edge of the mahogany table so hard my knuckles turned white. The restaurant. My grandfather's legacy. The business I had worked myself to exhaustion to protect, grow, and nurture like a third child. Marcus hadn't just been cheating on me. He had been bleeding us dry. He had been stealing the food out of our children's mouths while I was too focused on keeping the lights on to notice the slow, deliberate financial hemorrhaging. Miller spread out the bank statements, tracing the money trail with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime hunting wire fraud. He pointed to highlighted transactions. These aren't vendors, Mrs. Vance. These are shell companies registered in his name in the Cayman Islands. It's a complex web of money laundering designed to look like operational costs. Is that everything? Miller looked up, and for the first time, his expression shifted from professional to protective. No. There's more. And this is where it gets legally dangerous for you. He pulled out another stack of papers, credit card bills from the corporate American Express account. He hasn't just been stealing profit. He's been using your business credit to fund the affair. 5-star hotel rooms, diamond jewelry, flights to Miami and New Orleans, expensive dinners at places like Nobu. He has been charging everything to accounts that are in your name. He has run up $58,000 in charges that have absolutely nothing to do with restaurant operations. The walls were closing in, crushing me. Why does that endanger me? Because if this comes to light during a divorce without proper context, Miller said gravely, the IRS could view this as personal use of business funds. That is tax fraud. You could be implicated in embezzlement charges even though you had no knowledge of his activities. You could lose the license. You could face prison time. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was an existential threat. Marcus hadn't just stopped loving me. He had actively worked to destroy me, to burn down everything I had sacrificed to fuel his ego and his new life. Can you prove I didn't know? I asked, my voice trembling. Can you prove I wasn't involved? That is exactly why I documented evidence so thoroughly, Miller assured me. Timestamps show you were physically at the restaurant working during these transfers. We have witness statements. Your own personal financial records show you have been living modestly. Yes, I can prove you are the victim here. But you need to act carefully. Miller closed the folders and looked at me with a solemn respect. Mrs. Vance, I have seen people break under far less pressure. But I can tell you aren't the breaking kind. So, here is my professional advice. Get a lawyer. A shark. Document everything. And whatever you do, do not let him know what you know. Not yet. The element of surprise is the only weapon you have left. I left his office carrying a box filled with the wreckage of my life, photographs of my husband with another woman, records of theft, and the realization that the man I slept next to was my greatest enemy. I sat in my car in that parking garage and let myself fall apart for exactly 10 minutes. I cried for the marriage I thought was real. I cried for the betrayal of my children. I cried for the naive girl who thought love was enough. I wiped my face, fixed my makeup in the rearview mirror, and called Sarah Jenkins immediately. She was a woman who didn't deal in tears. She dealt in strategy. Tell me everything, Elena, she said when I sat down in her glass-walled office an hour later. I laid it all out. The private investigator's report, the photos of Tiffany, the staggering debt, the shell companies, the money laundering scheme hidden inside my family's legacy. Sarah listened in silence, her face hardening like drying concrete. By the time I finished, she was tapping her expensive pen against the desk, a dangerous rhythm. We have enough to bury him, Elena, she said, her voice sharp. We can file for an immediate restraining order, freeze the business assets, and sue him for breach of fiduciary duty. I can make sure he leaves this marriage with nothing but the suit on his back. I don't want that, I said calmly. Sarah stopped tapping. She looked at me over her glasses, confused. Excuse me? I want to give him everything he's asking for. Have you lost your mind? She leaned forward. He stole from you. He cheated on you. And you want to reward him? I need you to trust me, Sarah. I need you to let him think he has won the lottery. And I need you to help me structure a settlement that acts as a trap he will never see coming. I laid out the plan. Sarah's eyes went wide, then narrowed as the logic clicked into place. Slowly, a cold, calculating smile spread across her face. This is risky. If the district attorney doesn't bite, you could lose the restaurant forever. He'll bite, I said. Because men like Marcus are arrogant. He thinks he's the smartest person in the room. And that arrogance is exactly what is going to destroy him. The next few weeks were a masterclass in psychological warfare. I had to go home and pretend. I had to cook dinner for a man I now knew was a criminal. I had to make small talk about the weather while imagining him in handcuffs. I had to sleep in the same bed, lying rigid on the edge of the mattress, listening to the breathing of the man who had committed the ultimate betrayal. Marcus filed for divorce exactly 2 weeks later. He didn't even have the decency to tell me to my face. I came home from a shift to find a manila envelope on the kitchen island. A sticky note attached to it in his handwriting read, "My lawyer will be in touch." No conversation. No closure. Just a cowardly legal demand for the house, the cars, and full ownership of Vance's southern table. I called Sarah. "It's time." The proceedings moved at lightning speed because we offered zero resistance. Marcus's lawyer, Brad, was aggressive and condescending, treating me like a heartbroken housewife who didn't understand finance. He assumed I would fight tooth and nail for the restaurant. When Sarah presented our counteroffer complete, unconditional surrender of all assets to Marcus, Brad looked like he had swallowed a lemon. "You're agreeing to everything?" Brad asked, suspicious. "The liabilities, the assets, the operational control?" "Every single item," Sarah said, her voice smooth as silk. "She just wants out. She wants a clean break." Brad whispered to Marcus. Marcus looked at me, searching for the trick, but his greed was too loud. It drowned out his instincts. He signed the agreement. His signature was bold and confident, the signature of a man who thought he had just pulled off the heist of the century. What Marcus didn't understand was that business ownership is a double-edged sword. By fighting for full ownership of the restaurant, by claiming it was his hard work that built it, and by signing documents asserting he had full operational control, he was legally claiming ownership of the wire fraud too. Every dollar of embezzlement, every fraudulent transaction, every crime Detective Miller had documented now belonged solely to him. Sarah had worked with a forensic accountant named David Chen to package the evidence. We had built an airtight case, wrapped in a bow, waiting for the ink on the divorce papers to dry. The legal aftermath took 6 agonizing months to fully resolve. 6 months of depositions, hearings, and evidence presentations that felt both endless and surreal. While I was free to walk away, Marcus was plunged into a nightmare of his own making. He was charged with 12 counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. Each count carried its own weight, its own story of deception, meticulously documented by the forensic accountant who had spent weeks untangling the web of lies Marcus had woven around my life. The evidence was overwhelming. His signatures on fraudulent documents were clear as day. His email communications setting up shell companies with names that sounded legitimate but existed only to hide stolen money were projected on screens for the court to see. Bank statements showed transfers he had authorized personally, each one traceable back to his IP address. His digital fingerprints were all over every single crime. I attended every hearing. I sat in the back row, silent and stoic. I watched him sit at the defendant's table, watched the arrogance drain from his face as prosecutor after prosecutor laid out his crimes in excruciating detail. I watched him realize that his charm, his excuses, and his attempts to shift blame weren't going to save him this time. I watched him understand, perhaps for the first time in his privileged life, that actions have consequences that cannot be talked away. His lawyer, Brad, tried every desperate defense in the book. First, Marcus claimed he was manipulated by an unknown third party at the restaurant, suggesting that someone else must have had access to the accounts. When that theory fell apart under scrutiny, he claimed he didn't understand what he was signing, that he had been overwhelmed by financial jargon. When forensic experts testified that the transactions showed sophisticated knowledge and deliberate intent, he finally played his lowest card. He claimed he had been coerced by Tiffany. He tried to say his mistress had threatened him, that she had forced him into criminal activity to fund her lifestyle. It was pathetic watching him throw the woman he destroyed our marriage for under the bus. But nothing worked. The evidence was too strong, too detailed, too damning. His own emails betrayed him, messages where he bragged to his fraternity brothers about moving assets, where he celebrated successful transfers, where he planned his future with Tiffany using funds he had stolen from the business my grandfather built with his sweat and blood. In the end, faced with a potential 20-year sentence, Marcus took a plea deal rather than risk a jury trial that everyone knew he would lose. The terms were harsh but fair. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution of stolen funds totaling over $450,000 once interest and penalties were added, and permanent forfeiture of any claim to Vance's Southern Table or any Vance family assets. He now has a criminal record that will follow him for the rest of his life, making it nearly impossible for him to ever work in finance or corporate America again. Tiffany left him exactly 3 weeks after his arrest. I heard through the Atlanta grapevine that she moved back to Charlotte, deleted her social media, and claimed she was a victim of love. I felt a strange pang of pity for her. She had been lied to just as thoroughly as I had, just from a different angle. The stolen money was recovered through asset seizure. The house Marcus had demanded in the divorce, the one he thought was his prize, was foreclosed on when he couldn't make payments from his jail cell. The luxury cars he insisted he needed were repossessed. The investments he had made with embezzled funds were frozen, liquidated, and returned to the restaurant's accounts as restitution. I won't lie and say there wasn't some dark satisfaction in watching his carefully constructed world collapse. After every betrayal, every lie, and every moment of gaslighting, a part of me wanted to see him suffer. But that feeling faded quicker than I expected. Because revenge, real revenge, isn't about making someone suffer. It's about reclaiming your power. I rebuilt Vance's Southern Table from the ground up, but this time with an intention and clarity I never had before. The restaurant had taken a significant financial hit during the divorce proceedings and the discovery of the embezzlement. Vendors were nervous, wondering if the checks would bounce. Some of my longtime staff were looking for other jobs, worried that the ship was sinking. The neighborhood watched with concern, wondering if another Black-owned business was about to become a casualty of a broken family. But I was determined not to let that happen. I met with every vendor personally. I showed them the financial recovery plan. I gathered my staff, Big Mama Pearl, my manager Danny, the servers who had watched my kids grow up, and I told them the absolute truth. I didn't hide the ugly details of the betrayal or the theft. I should have told you all sooner, I said, standing in the kitchen prep area, the smell of roasted garlic hanging in the air. But we are going to rebuild this place. Not just as my grandfather's restaurant, but as our restaurant. I implemented a profit-sharing model. I brought in financial advisors to teach financial literacy to my entire staff, determined that no one under my roof would ever be vulnerable to the kind of manipulation Marcus had pulled. I made Vance's Southern Table a model for what a community business could be when it prioritized people over profit. The response was overwhelming. Regular customers came back in force. Food critics from Atlanta magazine wrote glowing features about our resilience menu. Within 8 months, we were profitable again. Within a year, I had saved enough to open a second location in College Park. My grandfather's legacy wasn't just alive, it was thriving. The custody arrangement was straightforward given Marcus's incarceration. I have sole physical custody of Maya and Leo. When Marcus is released, he will have supervised visits, but that is a bridge we will cross when we get there. The kids are healing. It hasn't been easy. Maya, now 12, asked me once if I hated her father. No, sweetheart, I told her, flipping pancakes in our kitchen on a Saturday morning. Hate takes up too much space. It's like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Your father made choices that hurt us, but I choose to move forward with love for you and your brother. Is it okay if I'm angry? She asked. It is absolutely okay to be angry. Anger tells you that you know your worth. Leo is younger, simpler. He just wants to know I'm there. And I am. I haven't missed a soccer game. I haven't missed a parent-teacher conference. I am consistent, and that consistency is the glue putting their world back together. I made sure they both see Dr. Eris, a wonderful therapist who helps them process the confusion without burdening them with my adult pain. Looking back, I learned something crucial through all of this sacrifice. Strength isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It's about knowing when to be quiet, when to observe, and when to let your enemies destroy themselves with their own hubris. My husband wanted everything. I gave it to him. And in doing so, he lost the only things that actually mattered. If you are going through a storm right now, if someone has betrayed your trust or broken your heart, please hear this. You haven't lost. Not unless you quit. Keep moving forward. Keep building. The person you become in the fire is the person you were always meant to be. My name is Elena Vance. This is my story, and I am just getting started. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, it really helps the channel. Make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on so you don't miss the next story. And before you go, check out the video on the screen right now. I think you'll love it. Thank you for listening, and stay strong.